Welcome back to Sun, Sand, and Soul. Josh Tomey with David Haber, Kyle Haggerty, and welcoming Gib Oxios onto the show for journalistic disclosure. Gib is my father-in-law, and has graciously volunteered to be on the show.
Cannot believe he allowed his daughter to marry you.
As an active board member, Gib and his condominium here in the region has gone through its own restoration and not wildly different from what we're hearing in some of the news stories. And so, Gib, I think, part of what we wanted to start with was, a little bit of a brief background on how you all at the condominium level and the board level discovered your own issues, because I think one of the things that we're hearing in the news is a quote unquote lack of transparency, which again, we translate without having a lot of deep knowledge in this particular story of saying, was there a narrative? Was there a storyline that was created that residents could understand what happened and how it happened? I think in your case, though, from what I understand, you actually had sort of more of an event that became the trigger for that restoration. So maybe tell us a little bit about that.
In 2020, we were, believe it or not yet complete with our 40-year certification. That began, I believe, in 2015. And while the repair work had been done, there was still one outstanding issue that with the city of North Miami as far as the folio numbers on the properties. And so that wasn't closed out. And we were waiting to start our 50-year knowing that was coming up in 2021, the building having been built in 1971. What happened before that in 2020 was that we had a monstrous rain event, which resulted in water intrusion throughout the two towers. Must have had, I think, 88 apartments that reported water intrusion. And we brought in people, eventually bringing in an engineer to do the study. We further contracted with a local contractor, went through that process, and it so timed itself that it really became dovetailed into the 50-year recertification. The 40-year was closed out with whatever we had to do with the clarification of those folio numbers, and we are still involved with finishing up the 50-year. The work that we did that was part of that 50-year was the exterior wall restoration. The roof would have probably qualified, but the real reason for that, as a side note, was that the insurance company was not going to insure us, even though we had 3 years of
we just talked about that
warranty. And we had, over the previous dozen or 15 years, had a very good maintenance program done with one of the top roofers in South Florida. Our roofs were in great condition, and he said, as long as you take good care of them, they'll extend well beyond the 15, 20-year warranty that you have, and they're in good shape now. The insurance companies don't judge it that way anymore. They say, oh, you bought a roof with a 15-year or 20-year warranty, you got 3 years left on it, why should we insure you when we can go down the street and insure somebody that has more recently replaced their roof? So we had to go through that process.
So from a structural perspective, you were doing exterior wall, you were doing roof.
And we also had some mechanical equipment, some pump room renovations, and we sort of balled that all up into a large special assessment.
The four-letter word.
Yeah. And we've followed that up with a couple of other items that we're looking forward to. As a matter of fact, I think the roof was thrown into the second assessment.
Gib, did you guys take a loan out, or did you just pay it out?
Yes, we took loans out.
And in terms of the loan that you took, did you negotiate the loan with one bank, or did you go to numerous banks to try to get the best rate?
I think we went to a couple of different banks to try to negotiate the best.
And did you do a 5-year loan, a 3-year loan, a 7-year loan?
No, these are 20-year loans.
Wow.
15.
Wow.
The cost.
Yeah,
without that, you're talking about raising the payout from each unit hundreds and hundreds of dollars if you shorten it. Now, some people may choose that for the $10,000 or the $14,000 that it all totals up to.
So what was the total assessment average per unit, approximately?
per month.
No. Total amount over the 15 or 20 years.
Well, 328 apartments into 5 million.
Okay.
So
that's probably something like 12,000.
right.
Yeah.
Something
Okay.
like
So
that,
not
15,000.
bad compared to the people who are paying 50 and 100,000.
Well, back in the day,
200,000.
5 million used to be a big special assessment. Now we're seeing these numbers thrown around:
Yeah,
20
5
million,
million is
30
nothing.
million, 40 million.
Well, you look at the Champlain numbers before
Right.
that happened, and
Right.
it was astronomical.
So Gib, I think, for drawing some parallels to what we're seeing in the news right now, I think our highest point of interest is understanding, you brought an engineer in. Ostensibly that engineer was principally focused on that exterior wall.
Absolutely.
So what did they tell you as a board? What did they, what assessment did they give, and where did you pivot from there? Was it sort of took it at face value and said, it's an engineer, it's a structural engineer, it is what it is, we've got to repair it? Or was there some of this consternation that we're certainly reading about in this case of 1060? What was the reaction? What did you do with it?
It was taken at face value. It was realized that it had to be done.
And
Obviously, as we've all experienced with condominium boards, experts are those people that come from outside. And even so, they don't always like the news that they receive.
well, they don't like the news when it has dollars associated
Absolutely.
with it. So the follow-up question is, the engineer comes to the board, gives the wonderful news that you need to do this work. In your building, was there a level of transparency? Was there a meeting with ownership, an open forum to talk about it? Did they do a PowerPoint or a presentation? Was there a letter sent to the owner saying, oops, look what we have to do? Was the ownership up in arms, or were they like, wow, we understand? Tell us a little bit about that part of the process.
I think what this points to is the level of transparency and communication in different facilities, in different condominiums. In ours, our boards, since I've been there, I've been on the board now, this is the end of my 8th year because of this new
law that says you can't stay.
Do more than 8 years. It started in my 2nd year, so
Right.
I will serve this
Last
25 year if I get elected on this month. But
being on this show could prevent you from getting reelected.
That might be a good thing. I'm not opposed to it. My primary
I will get a
reason,
thank you card from my mother-in-law, by the way. if
Right,
that's the case.
right. She's running.
She will take me out to dinner.
She's running for the board also,
Is she?
but that's a whole nother story.
Okay, let me just say, you're
our
in
next-
for a
she's our
real.
next guest.
She's good.
So you were saying.
Anyway, the one thing that I can say about our board is that all expenditures get brought to the public and get approved by the board. All expenditures. We're spending $30,000 to do some tile work. We want the board to approve it in an open board meeting. So we've had that kind of transparency. Another item that we received excellent news on was when the SIRS report was done. The firm, the representative from the firm, was amazed. He said, we have not run across one other condominium complex in South Florida of all the work that we have done that without reserves has kept up their buildings as well as you have. And because of that, your reserved amount, monthly amount,
Is less.
is coming way lower than.
So what is your building doing that's different than other buildings?
Yeah, what's the best practice?
Yeah,
There's
that's the best
there's a
practice.
great question.
What's the secret?
What's
we
the
are
secret sauce?
we are addressing repairs.
In a timely fashion.
Period.
It's not that complicated.
It's not really hard, and I don't know that I have anything to do with it.
Fair
I'm an architect, a general contractor. I don't
Well,
always get my.
there's certainly some influence there. I mean,
I don't always get my way. There's a lot of better practices that we could implement. But that's the condominium expert board mentality that, no, we're doing it fine, and no, you're not. There's better ways to handle this, especially for transparency, especially for effectiveness. But we've done a great job.
what was your rapport like with the membership? How much engagement directly were they allowed to have either with engineers or contractors? I think one of the things that we're hearing in the story about 1060 is, again, this sort of claim of lack of transparency. Again, not knowing whether there was or not. How much participation did you allow by the membership with direct interface, as opposed to, we're going to issue you a memo, we're going to be transparent and talk about it at a board meeting, everything's going to be moved properly at a board meeting, but when it comes down to it, we're making these decisions, your input is welcomed, but only as consequential as it might be.
There's two factors that come into play there. At 1060, there are 3 board members for 605 apartments. At Dome Condominium, there are 12 board members for 320 odd.
Oh my God, that's
long meetings.
It's hard. It's difficult, but the word gets out, and people talk, and board members talk, and we do it in front of open board meetings. The expertise from the unit owners, as with any place, you can't expect that to be overly high. If people have suggestions, I would say that 99% of the time they're really not anything that you can use, but at least there's an open ear. At least there's 12 members who are hearing it from their neighbors and coming back and talking about it. So I believe that on one hand, it's a pain in the rear end to get consensus sometimes.
I'm shocked you got 12 people who want to serve, especially after Champlain Towers.
Yes. And at this time, for all of the accolades we are receiving, our most recent was from our accounting firm, and our financial picture is very strong. And she also said, of all the places we handle, you guys are like doing great.
And do you self-manage or have a property management company?
We self-manage.
Wow.
Interesting.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Because I never recommend self-management.
He threatened me about being on the board
with a self-managed
situation.
And in context for our audience, it's about limiting the board's direct liability and exposure to those decisions in the absence of that. But listen, you guys have obviously done a lot of the right things. And I mean, it does not sound like this process, I'm sure from a board perspective, it's different, but it doesn't sound particularly rancorous, certainly not in comparison to what we're reading in the news. I think anytime you're handing somebody a multi-$1,000 bill, it's going to get scrutinized. I don't think there's any two ways around that. And it doesn't matter whether it's 5,000, 10,000 or 50,000, you're going to get some feedback.
So how many board meetings did you hold prior to approving the special assessment where you talked with residents? Was it one meeting? Was it multiple meetings?
Multiple meetings. We have a minimum of one meeting a month.
There you go. So now,
so
Kyle, as every man, you're seeing a board that has at least a meeting a month so that people have the opportunity to hear what's going on, the opportunity to give their input, even if the input really is not necessarily the most productive input. At least, as Gib said, there's an ear and someone listening, which makes people feel better, which is important for people to feel heard. Even on this program, you like to feel heard.
I know,
right?
And with Zoom meeting available,
so
now,
you do Zoom meetings.
So people can sit at home and not have to attend.
And so you have 300 owners. You have a meeting a month. Approximately how many people show up to a board meeting?
Sometimes it feels that way.
Yeah, sometimes there's no one.
It probably an average of a dozen to 15. It may jump up to 30 when it's budget time or when it's reviewing a major assessment that's going to take place.
Do you issue letters to the membership, like updates about what happened at the board meetings? Or do you just post the meeting minutes online and that's it?
We typically post meeting minutes online. We work with
But you don't send
Vertilink.
out, like if something is important that's coming out, you don't say, hey, we want to let you know this is coming up and we're going to be discussing it at the next board meeting and we'd love your input.
Not particularly.
Okay.
We post our notices and we break down what the agenda items are going to be discussed. People have a chance to see that.
Have you ever been the president of the board?
No, I was a secretary for about a half a year.
Okay.
I have restrictions on that.
I think those are domestic restrictions. Yeah. From what I understand privately, I'm gonna weigh in my inside baseball here. I've heard rumblings. No officer.
And I've considered it, but I don't think I would be a good president. I would probably be a little dictatorial. I would be a little demanding. I would assign people responsibilities and expect them as if it were administrative.
Right.
And I don't think boards really should work that way.
So let me ask you this, Gib. All hyperbole aside, you are an architect. You've been an architect how many years? You go ahead. It's okay.
1976.
All right. So long enough to count.
48.
Coming up on 50
48 years.
So you've been exclusively here as an architect in South Florida. So
I had my GC license, but didn't exercise it that much because I prefer the design world.
So you've got a lot of acumen in it, and obviously that had to play a role in your weighing in on the board. From an expert stance, because you're expert in the world of design, how much did you have to work against a lack of expertise, and how did you weigh that out? Because occasionally you do get experts who are on a board. I mean, you could have an attorney, you could have an architect, you could have
you get a contractor,
right.
You could have a banker, you could have any of these things.
I am not an expert in our board.
So
I am not considered.
Why is that when you are an expert in design? Why shouldn't you be?
That's what I call board member mentality. Experts are people that come in from outside that you have to pay.
So that brings up
which may in and of itself, by the way, be a best practice.
That brings up a very interesting point. I have had so many board members think that they know more than the outside expert because they are a contractor. They were a developer in New York or Pennsylvania.
I built single-family homes in Nevada, and so I know everything there is to know about condo.
But those are the most difficult board members to deal with in many cases because either in their mind they know more or they clearly think they know more, and it turns off the outside experts because the outside expert is trying to say, look, this is what you need to do. This is South Florida. This is the code here. And this is the way practice is done here. And someone comes in and says, well, I built warehouses in northern Ithaca.
Right.
And so therefore I know all about
high rise.
Whatever. and it becomes difficult. You get a lot of conflict between, and those people tend to try to dominate board conversation.
Right.
I think that.
Have you had that situation?
I'm going to take that as a yes.
Oh my goodness. My sanity has been questioned by other outside property managers and people that have long-standing in the property management world. You've got to be crazy. Well, hearing the stories that you're telling us, why do you continue doing it?
Well, let me ask you that. I mean, why?
That's a great question. Why do you?
Why are you on the board? I mean, what is it?
Because
keeps them married. Because it keeps them out of the house.
Because I'm stubborn. I know what I'm talking about. I do know what I'm talking about. I do know what transparency is all about. My entire career has been one of fiduciary responsibility, the key word, and transparency. I won't do any work for you, my son-in-law, without copying you on everything that happens.
Right.
I don't want to be ever in a position that says, you did that, but you don't let anybody know. And that's the way I feel that we should operate. That's one. Two, I think that the key for managing as a board is having the right questions asked.
Great point.
They don't know. Board members do not know what questions to ask. That's part of my biggest frustration because I have told the various presidents that have been on the board that I've served under, I don't want to be the big hero here. I just want you to listen. I just want you and the officers just listen to the topics that I bring up because I know what questions to ask. And I'm going to present them to you so that you can get the right answers from the people from the outside that you're bringing in.
Yeah, what's the sense
That's
of bringing in people if you're not going to ask the right questions?
Well, that always blows me away.
Listen,
Right.
And listen to the answers.
Right, exactly. You're bringing in these experts who are, by the way, not inexpensive, and you ignore their advice.
If it were only that, why go to the expert, even the outside expert? That has been a big hurdle for me to overcome, and I've overcome it. And I've got people understanding. Go to somebody who has a fiduciary relationship with you. Then go to the contractor with the package of what you want done.
Have you ever?
Don't go directly to the contractor and expect him to give you answers that are going to benefit you and not his own pocket.
Right. That's why you always have to have an engineer do specs and then send them the bid. And sometimes you need an owner's rep. You don't just go and ask a contractor,
what should
I
do?
What do I do?
It's like saying, it's
the
how much
rooster in the hen house.
How much money do you got, right? I mean, it's like, I want this. Well, what's in your pocket?
I keep emphasizing that the most important thing that you can have is a set of plans and documents that have been signed and sealed by a professional. With that, you can go to any contractor or contractors, or you can go for permit, or you can hold on to them until it's time. That's what you pay for. From there, you've had all the right questions asked, have the right person, have them help you review whatever the contractor's telling you. And then the last part of this is, on major projects, always have a project manager. That I have not yet succeeded.
Have you guys used your lawyer to review contracts?
Yes, but I don't believe in lawyers reviewing contracts.
You said that to David Haber. Wow.
I don't believe you're not worth it. Let me be. I don't mean to be offensive.
That's not offensive
but
to me.
You review boilerplate items.
I don't think a $20 million construction contract is boilerplate.
I know, but I need you on a $20 million contract. I need you on a $50,000 contract. I understand that. But you need somebody who understands what you're buying for $50,000 or for $20 million. And attorneys don't know what they're buying. They don't understand what the building requirements are, what the technicalities, and details. They have an understanding of law, but they don't have an understanding of construction necessarily. And
well, if you're a construction lawyer, you do.
Okay, to some degree.
If you're a construction lawyer, then you understand construction.
I might differ with you in saying retainage can happen this way, and we'll get a better result from the contractor, where an attorney might say, no, it's a 10% all the way to the end.
Not always. Sometimes it's 5%. Sometimes it's 15%. It all depends.
Well, maybe you're right there. Maybe I'll step back a little bit, but I guess what bothers me about it in my particular situation is weeks and weeks of time are added to contracts, to the process, because of contract review. It goes back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And here's 3 months have passed, and
you may have the wrong attorneys. I can tell you this.
For both sides. But it's both sides, not only our own.
I understand. But I had situations where they signed contracts. They didn't get a bond. They didn't ask for the right amount of insurance. They didn't negotiate the warranty. And they go and they sign a contract. And they didn't have a lawyer. And you end up in litigation.
I don't discount having a lawyer. That's not what I think I've said it a little too strongly. It's just that we can't just send it to lawyers without having the right, and I'm speaking in behalf of a project manager. I think that's where I'm coming from, that we need somebody who's reviewing that general construction contract and saying, okay, wait a minute, they're not fulfilling this. They've left out these clauses.
You always have the engineer or the project manager look at it for all kinds of technical specifications and the like.
Correct. So I haven't experienced it where I'm at now in the condominium setting. Before, in private work, yes, I personally am the one reviewing the contract and saying, we need to include this item because that's part of the invitation to bidders, And it's a critical part of what the contractor is going to be delivering to us.
Well, I always have, when we're doing it as lawyers, we always have the engineer or the project manager because they're involved with the specifications. We also have them put what the logistical plan is, the scaffolding plan. We have them put all the guts of what they need in there.
I wish that I would have had you review our exterior wall restoration project.
Why is that?
See that? I want you to play that back when they say, I don't want to.
I was going to say you just got sucked into a commercial for Sunset sold, by the way.
It's all right. The kickback is wonderful. I'm serious about that. I'm serious about that because leadership at that time had one of the board members reviewing that contract, and I asked, shouldn't that be something that I should be involved with? And I didn't get an answer.
Right.
But you also want things like, I mean, I know you know this because you're an architect. You have consequential damage issues. You have liquidated damages issues. There's so many business points that are also legal points. And there are so many technical engineering points that have a legal aspect to them that you want your engineer or your owner's rep to work with your lawyer when you're spending, you guys spent $5 million. You got to have people that know what they're doing, looking at this stuff, not just a board member.
Well,
do you agree with that?
Well, that has been what I call my failures to convince people that somebody like Amcon should be reviewing, should be contracted to work and make sure that for $5 million to spend 2% of that for their services would have saved us months and months of time and inconvenience, maybe even a year, and several hundreds of thousands of dollars.
I mean, you talk about Amcon, you're talking about an owner's rep company.
Right.
Project manager.
Right.
Project manager, somebody who can look at the contract and not depend on the engineer or the architect, because project managers know more than architects and engineers. It's a different side of the business.
Well, Paul, who was just on the show with us, talked about the importance of project management or owner's representation for exactly that reason, and saying they have acumen in all of those areas. They're not necessarily an expert in any one given thing, but they can speak the language of multiple parties that way.
No, the professional is responsible for covering his part of the work, and living up to his contract and making sure that everything is done. He's not interested in the overall picture for the owner of how are things getting coordinated? How does that affect the next project that you're going to bring in? What's the long-range view? How is this all woven together? He's really focused on making sure that his portion of the work is met to the letter of the contract.
Gib, what if anything would you have done differently? Like, left totally to your own judgment, what would you have done differently with any of that project?
I would have had a project manager there first day.
I do have a question for you too.
He would have had a lawyer review the contract day minus 10. Or
I
20.
I would have had a construction
lawyer. Right.
Do it.
Right. And then you would have hired a project manager, and they would have helped you look at the bids.
And we would have been done a year ago.
And that's the penny wise and pound foolish problem with a lot of these projects, because board members are scared of spending the money, and they don't realize it's penny wise and pound foolish. I always say this. The dollar you spend today on a lawyer, on a project manager, is going to save you $10 down the road. Because when
10 days, right? It's not. It's a dollar. It's dollars, and then time is money, and so it's a compounding.
And it's not just time is money. It's when you have the wrong contract that's drafted, and you have to litigate it 3 years from now, and you haven't had a lawyer do the contract. You find out all the things you should have done, but on the opposite side of where you should be.
Right.
I had the benefit early in my career of working with some very demanding owners and developers. And not a one of them ever said to me, "Don't worry, have it next week." Every one of them, the message was,
yesterday,
time
is money.
Don't let these projects go a day more than they have to. And every project that I handle, whether it's for you and now for you, is going to be every day that we save up front, we're going to need it at the end. And if we don't want to exceed our time frame, let's start gathering them now.
Well, that brings me back to this 1060 conundrum, right? And then Kyle, I know you got a question as well, but you know, in that thought process and saying, you know, what we've seen in this news story is that the residents at this condominium have essentially arrested the process, right? It's been stopped in its tracks. A board has been theoretically unseated, although I'm hearing different stories about whether that election was legal or not. And again, I don't know. But to say that that is not necessarily a course towards productivity, again, you know, and again, not knowing what the circumstances were, to say, you know, extending a project, especially one that is rising to that financial level, you know, could be disastrous for a condominium association.
Well, it definitely gives it a black eye in the community.
Right. I mean,
Before I say something, I've been doing all the yapping. Like he said, you had a question.
Oh, my question is really simple. How do you handle a situation when you're smarter than the expert in which you hired, or you know more? How do you handle that?
Got the wrong expert.
If I'm personally involved, I can't speak from a board standpoint.
Sure.
If they're hired, they're going to hear me
Got it.
at meetings.
Because the reason why I asked you that is that, you know, you said to me that an expert should come from outside. You know, that was something that you made very clear. Well, you can hire someone from the outside because they are the expert, but with your decades of experience, you could have a situation where you have someone that may not be as knowledgeable as you, even though you hired them from the outside.
Well, for me personally, I think I'm pretty good with other professionals because I defer to them. I'm polite to them. I always have worked in team concept mentality.
By the way, respect and politeness go a long way with experts.
Especially here, because I've seen experts get treated like absolute garbage.
Listen, I have my lawyers tell me that they get treated like garbage, and it really upsets me. And you know, the truth of the matter is these are difficult problems that we're dealing with in the community with construction and with the new regulations. People are very testy. It involves a lot of money, but I'll say this to the public at large. As a professional, when you treat me with respect and you're polite, you get a lot further than when you step on my neck and, tell me I want this in 3 seconds, even though you turned it into your own emergency.
Right.
And I agree 100% with you. There are enough examples as professionals where we are a necessary expense, and that's how we're treated.
Yeah.
How we're treated. Oh, God. Do we have to hear from the attorney? Do we have to hear from the architect again? That's costing us money.
Yeah, but we're saving money in the long run.
Like you said before, they see the pennies. They don't see the value. They don't see the dollars.
Right.
Right. Oh, God,
don't call the lawyer. Don't call the lawyer.
Don't call, exactly.
So then they end up in a litigation.
Absolute prohibition on calling the attorney.
And don't call the attorney, and then they end up in a $300,000 litigation because they didn't call the attorney up front for $100 or $500 or whatever it costs.
Well, I have a project manager.
Right. Well, Gib, first of all, thank you for coming on the show. I think it's illuminating to hear from a board member, related or not, that has gone through it and clearly has a lot of best practices to adopt. And I think the combination of transparency, deferring to experts, and really, I think more than anything, understanding that the longer, and this is coming from a management perspective, the longer a project drags on, not only does the expense become infinite, but I think one of the things that people lose track of in the condominium world is you then get this generational challenge because you have new unit owners who have moved in. Who
know nothing about what was going on.
You've got new iterations of the board. And so you wind up having a project take so long that the people who started it aren't even around anymore. I mean,
they can't make the final decisions.
They might not even live in the building. And so what they end up doing is pressing the reset switch. And I don't know if this is what's going on at 1060. I have no idea. But what I do know is I've seen enough of these projects get derailed because they say, Well, the other board may have heard about it, but I didn't, and so now I need to have the engineers come back and represent. Again, I don't like that attorney. I'm going to have a new attorney come in, and what was $5 million is now $10 million. What was $10 million is now $20 million, and I've seen that in so many instances.
And it takes an extra 2 years.
And that time orientation is not just about time is money.
And by the way, and every day that goes by, that spalling and that concrete corrosion keeps getting worse.
You know, David, you've had a lot of public facing time on what happened at Champlain Towers. I've had some as well, and you know, we've certainly collectively had a lot of conversations about it. But conversations like this always make me wonder how much of that was taking place, and you know, because we know this unfolded over the years. And I got to imagine in the case of 1060, though I'm not comparing the two circumstances, that was not something that was discovered yesterday. This is probably an issue that has been going on quite some time. You don't get to a $21 million special assessment overnight.
I wanted to comment on that. I was going to refer back to the 1060 problems. The thing that stands out to me is not that the board was pushing, but the president and his cohort were pressing to get this approved and putting off the elections and all this stuff. That's a side story. For me, it was a 15-year-old building with $21 million worth of
That's what Kyle's.
What?
That's what Kyle's big.
Our buildings are 50 years old, and we had $2 million or $5 million of repairs. They had 21 in the buildings.
Well, they don't build the way they used to.
Well, the engineer who was on the structural engineer was on the show. You know, he pointed out something interesting which I hadn't thought of. You know, he did some math in his head, and he said, "So that went live in 2008," and he was pointing that out that was during that
depression,
that sort of real estate depression that the entire country experienced. And we know in Miami how many cranes did we see go up in 06 and 07 that in 08 went dormant and were you know, sitting there unattended, to say what happened in that construction process during that period that might have led to
premature deterioration,
exposure. I mean,
rusting steel.
I mean, listen, how many I remember coming out of 08, 09. You remember, you know, the drywall sitting, you know, the drywall that had mold in it because it was sitting out, the rebar that had been rusted because it was sitting at Port of Miami for 2 years unattended, and to wonder, you know, how much of that was playing into it. Again, no concept of it right now, but to say it's interesting to think about that as well. Well, Gib, again, thank you so much for coming on the show. We are wrapping up on our time here, but appreciate the insight and certainly some of the best practices you've shared. I'm sure a lot of condominium association boards could learn some great lessons from clearly what you all are doing well. And not that I'm an advocate for self-management, but given the circumstances, it sounds like you guys have done a great job, and we appreciate the insight.
Thank you for having me.
This is Sun, Sand, and Sold. As always, Josh Tomey with David Haber, Kyle Haggerty, our on-air producer. Join us on YouTube, on Spotify, Instagram, X, and all of your favorite social media and streaming channels. We'll see you again soon.